Broadcasting live from our studio in Boston with presentations from prominent industry vendors, Solutions Review presents Data Demo Day, a virtual trade show for data management and analytics.
Hello, I'm Doug Atkinson here at Solutions Review, and welcome to Data Demo Day. Over the next 3 hours, we'll be taking an inside look at 3 of the top data technologies available today. And we have assembled a very strong lineup. 3 solutions, each offering a compelling value proposition across data virtualization, data catalogs, and data integration. First up is Denodo. And they're a great solution to lead us off because Denodo delivers real-time insights and data services with modern data virtualization. What that means is that they can help you to better leverage your data assets by providing agile self-service access to governed data, creating a data warehouse combining new and existing databases, and delivering real-time data to all of your analytics tools. And we're joined by Ed Robbins, Senior Sales Engineer at Denodo. Ed, thanks for being with us.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay?
I can. So
okay,
that's a
great.
good start.
That is a good start, yes. Always a good start.
Well, and I know you have been in the data sector for quite a while, previously with Oracle. Mm-hmm. Tell me a little bit about how you ended up getting involved with Denodo.
Well, I mean, as you said, I spent about 20 years at Oracle prior to coming to Denodo, mainly focused on data management, data warehousing, BI. And, for 20 years, I saw the focus on trying to get customers to consolidate data into less databases or into one large database. And frankly, it was 20 years of frustration. So seeing a sort of new cutting edge type solution that really approached it in a more elegant way as opposed to a brute force method of integration was kind of exciting for me. And so it's been 4 years, and it's probably been the best 4 years of my working life.
Outstanding. Well, I know you're going to get into the insides of the Denodo solution, the platform. And so we'll let you do that. Before you do, though, I'm sure you're going to give us a bit of an overview.
Yes.
So what I'll do is I'll get out of the way, let you go through your presentation and demo, and then we'll come back in about a half an hour when we'll have some questions for you that we'll take from the audience.
Okay, sounds great.
Talk to you in a bit.
Okay, so my name is Edwin Robbins. I'm a senior sales engineer with Denodo. And I'm going to give you a brief overview of Denodo version 8. That is our latest release of the Denodo platform. We released that in August, and we have an update coming shortly in January. And so once I give you a brief overview of the product, I'm going to just, before I get into the demo, I'm going to address execution and performance up front, because, in a typical presentation, it's always the first thing that people want to talk about when it comes to data virtualization is how we would achieve performance. And I think it's a pretty unique differentiator, so I just want to make sure I address that up front. I'll then jump into a couple quick demos to just show you where the product provides value, and then we can do some Q&A. So this slide represents the general logical architecture for Denodo. Okay, so the basic functionality of Denodo is represented here in this red box, and the way we operate is, as you see down here, we have lots of different data sources that we're representing, and one of the key paradigms of Denodo is that we want to be able to connect to any data source where it resides. So whether we're talking about data coming from a web service or coming from a cloud application or a traditional database, one of the key tenets of Denodo is to minimize data movement. So we will connect to the data in place, and then our server really has 2 functions. So we have a metadata repository, which holds all of the metadata for our various sources. And so once we've imported that metadata, the developers have a modeling process that's going to be very similar to creating a semantic model in an enterprise BI tool or creating an enterprise data model. The key differentiator is that with Denodo, those data assets don't have to be in one place. And also, as opposed to a data catalog or like a data dictionary, we also give you the ability to execute things directly from our metadata repository. So another key tenet of Denodo, in addition to being able to connect to any data source, is to make any data source available to any consuming application. So the bulk of our customers today are using Denodo for analytic queries. So I would say 80 to 85% of the query of the access today are SQL queries coming through JDBC and ODBC. But we see quite a bit of traction around customers using Denodo to create data as a service. So Denodo manages REST APIs and GraphQL components quite well as OData. And so we have customers that are using it to create enterprise data assets that serve as a single source of truth across both internal and external consumers. So you can create a REST API, say, for a customer that is pulling data from 5 different data sources, but is ultimately presenting your golden customer record to your end users. Okay, and then we also have a web data catalog and search tool. I want to make sure we don't confuse this with the enterprise data catalog type tools that you'll be seeing later. The Denodo data catalog is really focused on being a single place for the end users to come and find assets that Denodo has created. So the target here is not for the developers that are creating new things in Denodo. It's more targeted at the BI end users that want to create new reports based on things that are created in Denodo. And I'll show you an example of that in the demo. So the development architecture for Denodo is represented here. And similar to the prior slide, you can see the bottom layer is basically all of the sources. The middle layer is where we do our modeling, and the top layer is where people are coming to access the new assets. Okay, so the development is a little bit different with Denodo than like traditional ETL and other integration, because once we make connections to these physical sources, we're not moving any data. We're just bringing the metadata into that middle layer, and from that metadata, our developers create new Denodo views that can be accessed by any end user using any interface of choice. So the key capabilities for Denodo are really represented here. And I would say that, on the left side, we're going to see 2 demos today covering an example of source abstraction and also an example of semantic data modeling. But the general concept here with source abstraction is creating a single virtual repository for your end users to access any of your data. So rather than them, needing to know where certain data sets are, or how to access, or even more troublesome, how to join different types of data sets together, that's all handled by Denodo behind the scenes. The other benefit of this is when oftentimes IT will want to move a physical data set to a different technology, and they're often hamstrung because of all the things that are tied to that data source. So customers that have an on-prem data warehouse that they want to move to the cloud are oftentimes coming to Denodo because we can help with that transition. So you put Denodo between your BI tools and your data sources, and the BI tool only talks to Denodo, and that way you can move the data sources around at will behind the scenes. The semantic data model, we'll see an example of in a little bit, but the basic idea is, lots of customers, especially ones that have grown through acquisition, have acquired lots of DSS assets over time. And they're often faced with the challenge of, how do we integrate these new assets into our existing data stores? And often by the time they get done doing that integration, there's another asset that needs to be integrated. So the target with Denodo is basically to create a logical semantic model over the top of these assets so that to your end users, it looks like they're connecting to one single repository, but that data is all staying where it originally resides. So it's a much, much faster time to market for delivering these consolidated data models to your end users. I already touched on the publication options, so I'll skip over that. The dynamic query optimizer, this is really one of the core features of why people buy Denodo in the first place, and I'll touch on this in a bit. But the basic concept here is that Denodo has a query optimizer that's very similar to a relational databases optimizer. The main difference is that our optimizer is targeted at minimizing the amount of data that moves across the network. So we're always trying to minimize the amount of data that we have to move, and that's the function of the optimizer. And then lastly, in development and operations, we've got integration with single sign-on, as you would expect. We have a centralized solution manager. But one thing I do want to point out that we came out with in version 8 is this automatic cloud deployments. So in version 8, we released the first version to work with Amazon's EC2 instances. And basically the idea here is instead of having to install your own host and install software on those hosts and do all the configurations with your load balancer and so on and so forth, you basically put your Amazon credentials into the Denodo Solution Manager. You answer some questions in 4 wizard screens about the size and shape of the deployment that you want to deploy. Do you want to do things like bursting, or do you want it to just be static? And basically, Denodo takes that information, talks to the AWS APIs, and automatically deploys your environment. So what used to take several days or weeks of work is now done in a matter of minutes. So how does execution work? So the basic idea is that we only store metadata, and we're always trying to minimize the network traffic, as I mentioned. So the information that we have to work with, the most important thing is going to be the incoming SQL statement. That's going to tell us, is it asking for a detail level report, or is it asking for an aggregation or a calculation? We also are very interested in the type of metadata that is on the table. So the source system, the primary keys, the foreign keys, that's all going to give us all information that we can use to come up with the best optimization plan. And just like a relational database, we're also going to look at data statistics to understand the volumes of the data that we're accessing, and that's going to be a tremendous driver in how we go about executing these queries. So these are just some of the strategies that we employ. I'm not going to go through these for the sake of time, but the basic idea is that over time we keep adding more and more capabilities to accelerate these queries. So in the most recent release, we added the summary query capability. This is very similar to query acceleration that you see in BI tools or materialized view type acceleration. In the last release, we introduced MPP integration. Going forward, we're going to integrate. We're going to offer an integrated Presto cluster if customers want it. So we keep adding more and more features to try and optimize these queries and to make it as transparent as possible for the end users. So let me give you a quick example, and then I'll get into the demo. So what is the when I keep talking about the optimizers trying to perform the most performant queries and whatnot. So what does that really mean? So here's a classic data virtualization query that a lot of times is the point where people get frustrated with federated tools or other DV type tools. So here we're just asking for the average sale by state. Okay, so by definition, this is a fairly simple business question since it's only going to return 50 rows of data. So to the end users, this looks like a very simple question. The challenge from an IT standpoint is that our customer and our sales data are in different databases. So we need to figure out the best execution plan for this particular query. Now, over here, option 1, this represents what we call the naive strategy. And frankly, this is how most federated tools would execute this particular query. They're going to access the customer database and read all that data back, and they're going to access the sales database, read all that data back, do a join, and then do an aggregation. The challenge with this is right here. We need to move 300 million rows of data over the network before we can even start returning data to the end user. And so that's a big bottleneck in this particular query. So rather than doing this, what Denodo would do is either option 2 or option 3. Option 2 is taking advantage of something called temporary data movement. So what Denodo does here is we would first read the 2 million rows from the customer table and make a copy of that over in the sales database. At that point, then, we would just have the sales database execute the join and the aggregation in place and return the 50 rows to the end user. The other option is Denodo could execute something called partial aggregation pushdown. So what this means is that we know that the customer ID is the primary key on the customer table. And since that's the key that we're using to join to the sales database, we know that we can pre-aggregate the sales database by ID. So even though the query is asking for the data to be returned by state, Denodo knows that this is the lowest level in the table, and so it's going to pre-aggregate by customer ID, and we're going to reduce those 300 million rows down to 2 million rows, return the 2 million rows to Denodo, join it with the customer table, and then ultimately return our result to the end user. Okay, and the reason, where this comes into play, just a simple, and this is something you could easily try on your own. Here you see the performance difference, right? So just by applying a simple change to how Denodo sends the SQL down to these source systems, we reduced the amount of data that had to be transferred from 302 million rows to 4 million rows. And comparing this to a setup where we had a BI tool talking to Denodo, which was connected to the data sources, versus a BI tool that was just connected to the data sources, you can see the improvement. So it's about a 13 or 14x improvement just by Denodo changing the SQL statement that it sends down to the sales database. Okay? So I'm going to jump over to the demo right now. Excuse me. And there we go. Okay, so in version 8, Denodo integrated all of our front-end tools with single sign-on server. So I have a single sign-on server set up here, and these are all of the tools that I have available to me. So I have 2 different environments set up here. My first environment is a development environment. So I have all the tools that the developers would need. And then we also have an end user environment. So if you have end users that are just going to be consuming Denodo views, you would just provision them to this environment, and they can just access their views from the catalog, which I'm going to show you in just a minute. So first I'm going to open up the Design Studio, and I'm going to build a simple view based on a request from one of our customers. So let me go back to that. So this is the request that we got from an end user. What was the impact of the marketing campaign for each country? So the challenge from an IT standpoint is that this data is in multiple source systems. So we've got our historical sales data is in a Presto database, and it's about 3 million rows. Our campaign information is in a cloud-based application, and that's a fairly small data set, but we don't have database level access to it. So we're going to basically just get a JSON document that we need to transform. And then lastly, we need to combine it with our customer master, which is in an Oracle database. So the way Denodo approaches this is we make a physical connection to each of these sources and extract the metadata for the object that we want to work with, which is represented here in these grayed out boxes called a base view. Once we've imported this metadata, now it's just up to the developer to do a graphical drag and drop operation to join some columns together, create a new calculation, and then ultimately create a view that end users can access directly. Okay, and that's what I'm going to show you right now. So let's go in here. So this is the Denodo Design Studio, and the way we organize things is in what we call virtual databases. So each of these over here represents a virtual database or a VDB. And inside a virtual database, I have things organized by folder. So I typically put all of my connectivity information into one folder. So that's going to be my data source definitions and my base views. So my base views are basically the tables and the objects from those source systems that I want to work with in my development environment. Okay. Now, once I've imported the base views, down here in the integration layer, what I did is I cleaned up those base views. I changed some of the naming mechanisms. I did a little data cleansing. And what I've done is I've created some views to represent our dimension objects and our fact tables. Okay. So if I want to build the view that we talked about a little bit earlier, I'm going to start with the store sales history. And I want to build a new join. So there's my fact table. And I just need to grab the campaign management, the customer, and the date dimension to complete my view. Okay. Now, so the developer's task is really going to be similar to this. They're going to basically drag and drop between some views. They are going to then define the columns that make up that join. So in this case, it's promo to promo. And then customer to customer. And then dates to sold date. Okay. So those are my 3 joins. If I click on the join conditions, I can see the actual definitions of them. And if I wanted to change this to any kind of outer join, I could do that as well. Now, this particular query is an aggregation. So the first thing I need to do is define my group by clause. So that is going to be, let's see, I'm just going to type it in here, promo. Okay, so we got month, year, country, and promotion name. Okay, so in my output, I'm going to basically now just define evolution, campaign management, evolution. That's going to be the name of my view. I can then change the names of any of the columns that I want. So I'm going to change birth country to country. And then the last thing I need to do is I just need to add the calculated field. So I need to sum the total sales by campaign. So I'm going to create a calculated field to aggregate the sales by campaign. Okay, I got my formatting correct and I'm good to go. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. Oh, sorry, I ran this demo before and didn't delete it. Oh gosh, I just ran this demo before and didn't delete it. There we go. Okay, so there's the demo or the view that we just created, campaign evolution. All right, so if I go over and look at campaign evolution, what I always typically do before I actually run a query is I like to look at the execution plan. So, query plan. Okay, so if I take a look at a query plan, if I click on the top level, this is going to show me the high-level summary of how Denodo plans on running this particular query. So the first thing I look for are what are the optimizations that it plans to apply, and I can see it's going to apply join reordering and data movement, which is what I've expected. And so if I click on any of these boxes, it'll show me exactly what's going on. So typically, I read these from the lowest left-hand corner. So this is showing me that the first thing it's going to do is connect to my Oracle database, and it's going to query my customer information. And then this icon is basically telling me once it queries all that customer information, what we're going to do is then implement a data movement plan. So we're going to copy that customer data over to where my fact table is and just run the query all over there. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and kick this off. And as I said before, this is running against like a 3 million row table against a 100,000 row table. So it should take a minute or two. And while that's running, what I wanted to do is talk about one of our new query acceleration features. So I mentioned this briefly in the beginning. We, in version 8, added the ability to enable smart summaries summary queries, summary views, that basically act as an accelerator. So these are very similar to aggregation awareness that you would see in reporting tools and OLAP engines. And the basic idea is if you have a fact table that's maybe all the data stored at the day level, we can create a summary view that's basically aggregating that data maybe at the monthly level. And then Denodo at runtime, based on the optimizer, can pick and choose which of these summaries it plans to use. Okay, so if I go back over, let me show you the net result. Okay, so this query came back, and if I look at the actual, let me get rid of this. If I look at the actual runtime, it took about 17 seconds, which is okay. I can see the data movement was applied, so it applied all the optimizations. And for an ad hoc query, 17 seconds on a query like this is fine. But what if I now want to turn this into a query that gets used in a dashboard? Okay, so some of you may have noticed when I first ran this, I clicked the do not use cache. The reason for that is I had already created a summary view ahead of time. So I've created a summary view already for this particular query. And so if I allow it, if I unclick that, that means that it's now going to use this as a candidate for this particular query, okay? So if I click the query plan now, instead of it going out to all 3 sources, now it just has to go out to that one summary table and return the results. So if I look here, now the optimizations applied are just summary rewrite, and you'll see when I run the query, it should come back in a couple of seconds, okay? So that's kind of the process of, first exploring, finding data that's of value. Once you find it's of value and you want to, quote unquote, maybe productionalize it or make it a dashboard, it's very easy to go from there to creating, like sub-second response on your queries by just adding a summary view. Okay? Now so once this view is created, the next step is to make it available to the end users. So I'm going to go back to my opening here, and I'm going to open my data catalog, which is my end user tool. And I'm going to go ahead and, so the opening screen here for the data catalog, we like to present this as being like the, like Google for your Denodo data, right? So we wanted to be a very simple screen so you could just come in and search for whatever you wanted. So if I just type in campaign, it's going to come back with a ranked search of the campaign, all the views that have campaign in it, okay? So let's take a look at this one. So when I take a look at the view, if I want to validate it for my end user, typically the first thing that I'm going to do is take a look at the lineage and make sure that the lineage map looks okay. Okay, so the lineage map is fully interactive. So the first thing I want to validate is to make sure that the data sources are correct, and those are all coming from the right place. And they are, so that you can see CRM, that's the CRM database. If I click over here on any of the columns, it's going to show me exactly where that column came from. So in this case, promotion is coming from my web service. Year is going to be coming from my date dimension. And even a calculated field like total, it's going to show me the field that was used in the calculation, and it's also going to show me the actual calculation itself. Okay, so so the lineage all looks correct, and I'm okay with what I see, at least from the logical standpoint. So the last step would be to go ahead and run a query against the data. So once that result set comes back, if I want to further investigate it, I can go ahead and export it to a number of formats, including Tableau, or I could just go over here and connect to it directly. So if I click on the Tableau button, that's going to create a connect file to connect Tableau directly to this view. If I was to click on that connectivity button, it shows me all the options for how I can connect to this particular view. Okay? So, so once this has been, so once the end user comes in and they validate that this, is everything they want, at that point now they can just go ahead and connect with their BI tool. They can use one of the connect strings and go ahead and develop their report. Okay. Now, the last demo that I wanted to show you is around semantic models. So the concept here, and this is very similar and very common in a lot of customers that we see. The example here is we have a sample retailer that was a traditional in-store retailer that has grown through acquisitions. They always had a Oracle Enterprise Data Warehouse has always been the focal point for their business intelligence. And they've recently had several acquisitions around catalog and web sales. And those acquisitions have all come with their own DSS tools. So rather than doing a physical consolidation, they decided to deploy a logical data warehouse for a unified company view. And much of the analysis will continue to be sales channel specific, but they also wanted to give people like the CFO a very broad across the sales channel view of how sales are looking. So these are the data sources that are in my my demo today, and these are all live data sources. So we've got 3 REST APIs that we also want to incorporate. We got an inventory management, CRM, and a couple data marts. So the goal here is we want to minimize disruption as much as possible. We want to allow a single connectivity solution for all BI cases, and we want to enable cross-channel analytics. Okay, so what we've done is if I go over to my design tool, okay. So if I go to my design tool, you can see under the connectivity layer, I already have all these data sources in place. So I've got my SQL Server data marts, I've got my Oracle EDW, so on and so forth. So what we've done here in this integration layer is we've created a handful of detailed views. So what we want to do is basically we're creating content for end users that aren't really SQL savvy. So we don't want them to have to create their own tables. So we're basically going to pre-join a series of relevant tables together so that they can just pick and choose the columns that they want. Okay, so if I look under the finance folder, you can see I basically have a detailed view for each of the lines of business: catalog sales, store sales, and web sales. So let's take a look at what exactly is going on here. So if we look at the construction of these views, basically we have a star schema. A little messy. There we go. So we have a catalog sales fact star schema that is joined to a date dimension, the item dimension, and the customer address and customer dimension. Okay. So all of these detail views are all pre-joined to the same dimensions. And so these are the core dimensions that we're going to need for financial analysis. And so at the end of the day, what we've done is we've just created a view that has all of the key measures and all of the key attributes that our finance team needs for doing their analysis. Okay, so once I've created basically a pre-joined star schema for each of those individual lines of business, what we then did for the office of the CFO is we created a view called All Sales Finance that incorporates all the lines of business. Okay, so this one is I'm going to show you in the BI tool. So this one is going to include every line of business that we have. And let me show it to you up here. So if we look under finance, it's all sales by region, channel, quarter. If I look at the lineage, you can see it's basically a union of each of those individual detail views. Okay, so if I expand this, so this is store sales, this is web sales, and this is catalog sales. Okay, so now if I'm say the CFO and I want to run a report for all sales by region, channel, year, now I just have a single view that I can go in and run, and that query is actually now going across all those fact tables. So it's 3 different fact tables and several different dimensions all being brought together for this one consolidated view. If you look at the lineage, you can see it's a pretty broad query. Now, that's useful for someone that needs to be able to see everything across the board. But what about an end user that is focused just on store sales? Well, here I have a Power BI report that is accessing the exact same query. So you can see it's all sales by region, channel, year. But you'll notice that the result set is decidedly smaller. Okay, and the reason for that is this user is limited to only having access to the store sales channel and the East region. So this is a store manager on the East, and so they don't need to have access to catalog sales and web sales. And so by accessing the same view with different credentials, we're just delivering the data that they need. So those are my demos and presentation. I guess now I'd like to turn it over to Q&A.
Nice demo. Very nice demo, Ed. You got a lot in there. And where are you seeing demand for a platform like Denodo?
I would say probably the 2 most common use cases that we get presented with, like when I go into a POC, one would be Customer 360, so augmented customer view. I feel like almost every insurance company that I talk to has a need to see one consolidated view of their customer across every policy and claim they've ever made, because they have lots of different systems. The other one would be hybrid cloud. So everybody, it seems like today, has some sort of cloud strategy, and getting to that sort of end state presents a lot of challenges. And that's probably one of the most valuable areas that Denodo is helping customers, is how do we take some of our existing on-prem assets and move those to the cloud without disruption?
Well, so I'm no expert, so I'm going to kind of work my way through this question because it's a little more detailed.
Sure.
So it's basically asking around performance issues. If I didn't require data from one of the dimensions, how do you avoid querying data sources that aren't required?
Oh, okay. So that's one of our built-in optimizations. So it's basically it's something called branch pruning. So let me give you a quick example of that. So if I go into the design studio here, and in this case I'm going to query this all sales finance, right? So this is pulling data from catalog, web, and as well as store sales. So here we have, so this is the view that I showed you before called all sales by year or by quarter, excuse me. So if I don't apply a predicate here, if I just say do a select star, you look at the query plan, it's pretty big, right? It's going across lots and lots of stuff. I see the execution plan. It's basically doing some data movement, but since we're just asking for all the details, it doesn't do a lot of optimizations. If I go back here and I just apply a predicate. So in this case, rather than asking for sales across every channel, I only want sales from the web channel. Now when I do, you'll see the plan looks much smaller, and the reason for that is we applied something called branch pruning. So basically, what it did is it determined based on that predicate that we don't need any information from store sales or catalog sales. So it just completely ignores those branches of the view, and it's only going to query the branch relative to web sales.
I think that was a great answer,
Okay.
as far as I know. I do have a question though, with regard to people are asking how do people engage? How do they get started? You know, is there kind of a path to start talking? Is there a trial? How long
absolutely.
does it take?
So
that sort of thing.
Yeah, so we actually have several test drives that people can sign up for free. We will provision a demo environment in either Google Cloud, AWS, or Azure. If you go to our homepage or you just search for Denodo test drive, you'll see the link to it. And we basically provision a fully enabled environment with data sets, and there's a 2-hour workshop that you can work through at your own pace to get more hands-on with the tool. So I would encourage you to start with that. And if you want to go beyond that, just find one of our sales guys.
How do you see this applied to the retail industry?
Applied to the retail industry?
Yes.
So one of the big areas of retail that we initially got started with was data warehouse offloading. So people that had legacy Oracle Teradata systems, they wanted to move some of that to either Hadoop or move it to the cloud. Denodo plays a big role with that. And also with the example that I gave you before, where lots of retailers acquire smaller companies or big companies or whatever, and those all come with their own DSS assets. So retailers have as much data as anybody, and so just putting a semantic model on top of it at the logical layer makes it a lot easier to access everything.
Another one, I want to apply this to a hybrid model where we have a lot of on-prem DBS, DBs, and Azure Data Lake.
Okay. Yeah. So that's actually one of our very common use cases. So what we typically see is customers have, let's say in Azure, they would have Azure Data Lake and maybe say like one other data source, and then they have on-prem multiple data sources. What we typically do there is put a Denodo server in the cloud, so in this case in Azure, and a Denodo server on-prem. And the two Denodo servers basically talk to each other. So it minimizes the amount of data that has to go back and forth across the cloud network. And also, gives us a lot of optimization capabilities for those servers that are in place.
Would you be able to further describe zero replication characteristics of the Denodo platform?
Yeah, sure. So I guess one of the analogies that I think works really well for people is that Denodo, for those that are familiar with a tankless water heater versus a traditional water heater where you have all the hot water in place. So a tankless water heater just heats the water as it comes through. And that's really how Denodo works. So when we say that we do not persist data, basically the Denodo server sits between the data source and the BI tool. And the BI tool sends a query to Denodo. Denodo turns that into a call to the data source and then returns the data to the end user. So Denodo is acting as a pass-through mechanism. We're not trying to create a better mousetrap to scan data faster or to read data faster or crunch data any faster. We're really more of an intelligent traffic cop. So it's more about understanding the fastest way to get, to get a query solved based on the assets that we have available to us.
So a question that has been asked, which actually is relevant given the fact that you released 8.0 in August. I think you mentioned you've got another release coming up in January.
Yes.
And so one of the questions is, how do you handle application upgrades?
Yeah. So Denodo, so basically, one of the other nice things about it's not persisting data is that Denodo, at the end of the day, there isn't a lot of data to manage with upgrades. So the Denodo metadata layer, the metadata repository is, a big metadata repository would be like maybe 2 or 3 gigabytes. So a typical upgrade is an export of the metadata. You import, you stand up the new version of Denodo and then import the metadata. So most of our customers are able to do upgrades in a matter of a couple of days, with including all the testing. It's fairly straightforward.
So another one, what guidance would you give for when Denodo gets to a point that virtualization no longer makes sense versus physically moving all of your data assets to a central data solution like Snowflake?
Well, I don't know. I mean, listen, I spent 20 years at Oracle, and we were trying to get people to put everything in one database for 20 years. So I think that's a bit of a moving target. So I know that every database vendor in the world would like you to have all their data in their database, but I've yet to see a customer that does that. So what I would say is it's going to continue to be an evolving situation where you'll have the preponderance of your data may be in Snowflake, but you're still going to have people creating data in spreadsheets and data marts, in S3 buckets and all over the place. And Denodo basically just serves as that layer on top. But if people feel like, they've managed to solve the world's biggest problem and get all their data into one database, I'm more than happy to find out how they did it.
Outstanding. All right. Well, this was a great demo, great discussion. I have a question. One last parting question. You do have a new release coming up in January. Anything you want to share that you might be able to? Yeah. So
we typically release quarterly updates to our products that are typically more like incremental improvements and bug fixes. But one of the things in the next release, it's a fairly major release, is we are redesigning the data catalog and adding a lot more collaboration features. So going forward, the data catalog, you'll have the ability to upvote and downvote on data assets, recommend views to other people. And it'll also have a recommendation engine to say, okay, based on the views that you've looked at in the past and what other people are looking at, you may want to check out these views. So we're trying to make it more user-friendly for the non-technical person to be able to find what they need to do their job.
Outstanding. Ed, thanks very much for all of that information about Denodo. We would certainly encourage everybody to go check out Denodo's website and all of the information that they provide there, which is quite substantial.
And try the test drives. The test drives are very useful.
And give it a test drive, sure.
Yeah. All right, thanks a lot.
All right, thanks very much. And we will be back at the top of the hour with our next demo, so stay tuned. Thanks.